to We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only show dedicated to the process and strategies for transforming apartment buildings to thriving communities. I am your host, John Brackett, and welcome to the show. All right, folks, welcome to another great episode of We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only place where you come to learn how to take apartment buildings and turn them into amazing communities. I am your host, John Brackett. Welcome to the show. I have here another great guest. Her name is Tina Thomas. So Tina is someone that I'm very excited to speak to today because oftentimes in this business, especially when we're buying value add apartment buildings or looking to improve an apartment building or reposition one for that matter, there's always this discussion around design, right? Which usually plays into a business plan. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity to start talking about how to use design to reposition properties. In many cases, from my own experiences, we'll go in, we'll buy a property, we'll underwrite it, right? Have it under contract, start thinking through the business plan. And then when we close, at that point, we start executing. Well, the design of a property is a really big component. And I think it's an area that's probably most investors understand the significance of that and the value associated with it. But I think finding the right people who can come alongside you to help incorporate a design theme that fits that market and will allow you to execute on your revenue and expense plan, I think is really critical. Really, your revenue plan, right? I mean, ultimately, I think the design creates a huge impact around revenues. So let's talk about that. So Tina, welcome to the show. Really excited to have you on. I know you are an architect by trade, but you moved into the design space and that's where your passion is. You work with investors throughout the country. So, hey, welcome. Really excited to have you on.
Yeah, thank you. I'm like nodding my head through a lot of what you were saying.
Yeah.
It's funny because I found that I think the design side is almost like this unknown territory, to where sometimes when you say design, like, oh, we're going to talk to a designer, I think some people all of a sudden are like, dollar signs. They just think, oh, we're just immediately going out of budget. It's like, no, it's actually opposite. To me, our role is to help investors, because you might be looking at a property that in your mind, you're thinking it could be something basic, it could be something extreme, it could be something in between. But a lot of times there's other options. It could be maximizing what you have. Let's say you start with 10 units, you end with 10 units. I'm doing simple math here.
Sure.
It could be that those were 10 huge units. Maybe the market calls for splitting them. So maybe you can actually have more units instead of 10 units. Maybe you not, maybe not. So like my background is in architecture. I say I kind of put that hat up in the sense that I don't do construction documents, which is what you have to go to permit.
Right.
But I do the layouts, meaning like you're talking about, in the beginning, the best is in the very beginning. Even having, whether it's a consultation, what have you, something where you can go, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. Does it make sense? Like, will this actually lay out the way I think it will? And in those situations, it's when you're going to actually change, from scratch. Even if, let's say, you have those, I say 10, probably 100. But anyway, I was doing simple math. Yeah. If you have those 10 units and you're sticking with those 10 units, there's still so much more to design because a lot of it is not on the interior. It is the exterior. I think the exterior sometimes can be more important than the interior. And it's because that's someone's home, right? Like your target, you're renting it out.
Right.
And you could have the best interior package, but if you don't address the exterior, you're going to have people that drive up and they're going to keep on driving because the outside is not appealing to them, or they don't want their friends having to see it or what have you. And I think the way you have to approach with multifamily and design, it's all about your NOI, right? You want to increase it.
Right.
You can do that with the exterior, with the amenities, with the way it looks. Again, functionality depending on the unit. And a lot of people skip over that and they just see a building and they're like, oh, I'll slap some paint on it. That may not be the best thing. You might be missing out on opportunities to really increase the value of that property by doing different things on the outside. And everyone has their own hat, right? Like I don't build cabinets personally. And so I'm not going to tell a cabinet guy, how to do their job essentially, right? I'm the concept person. They're the ones that execute. When it comes to multifamily, you're the one buying the property, right? That's your expertise. If you work with people that know best what they do within their fields, you're going to get better results with your numbers, with the looks, with everything. Yeah. So, we're definitely not here to charge, subtract your numbers. I mean, the whole point of a good design is to increase your NOI.
Okay, cool. So let's do this for our audience. Let's kind of walk them through the process of a design, right, or a proposed design. So in this case, you said you don't do construction documents, which is why I kind of want to walk our audience through this. Yep. So I'll use a recent project that we're doing. Actually, we start on this project next week, I believe. Today, we started on the 15th with the architect, and so we actually start the design next week. So let's walk our audience through the process, right? So we have the as-built, right, or the schematic phase. Yep. From the schematic phase, we move to the as-proposed phase, right, where you come in and you start doing the design concepts. But very difficult to do that if you don't have an as-built set of drawings in place, right? So you go as-built, then you do as-proposed. Essentially, if you're proposing that to the city, or what your proposed plan is, and that's where you come in to help create the conceptual design within that. And then lastly, once you have that in place, then that concept goes to construction documents. Now you can outsource that. I know you said you don't do that.
Yeah, I work with other people that do that. I just don't personally do it. And also for what I do, sorry if you keep hearing a ring, that's my computer.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Because I work with people outside of my city, every city's different. And so like when I do floor plans, it is the conceptual phase.
Right.
And then you work with a local architect, and they're the ones that can actually, follow your city codes, make sure everything's, permittable. Sure. And it also depends because some projects don't go to that extreme. So sometimes it's not necessarily you need construction documents because there might be minor things that you're doing. So that also depends. In those situations, I don't need as-built. I actually have a package that I put together that says, these are all the photos I need. These are the videos I need. And then I send it to you. And then as long as you get me all my information, I do the design. So it kind of depends on the type of project you're working on. Obviously, the extreme is almost new construction. And then on the opposite end, we're keeping all walls in place. You just need to elevate the building itself. So there's kind of an extreme on both ends.
Okay, great. So let's talk through that. Okay, let's talk through that. So let's. I'm going to paint a picture. Okay, I'm going to paint a picture for our audience. So you work. Where are you out of? Where's your office out of?
Houston, Texas.
Oh, you're in Houston. Okay, great. So we own there. So you're in Houston, but say you have someone that is in another state. Okay. Mm-hmm. And let's say the state is Arizona. So in this particular case, the state of Arizona, say I come to you and I said, Tina, we have this property, we have this apartment building where we want to, upgrade the common area, right? The office space. We're thinking about changing the design conceptually so that we can I think there's an opportunity to be able to bump rents, but just change the feel of the community, right?
Yep.
Okay, and here's the concept. We bring you in and you make that concept a reality, right? Now, if you're in one state but operating, thinking about a design concept in another, and a really good friend of mine owns a fairly large company, and they do this for national builders, and they have a really interesting process. But now, what would you be asking me for, right? And I'm using this as an example so that our audience, and me for that matter, we have an idea of what your process is. Because it's one thing to do business in your own backyard, something completely different when you're hiring somebody to help you bring a concept to life in a different state, right? So can you kind of talk us through those steps?
Yeah. So what I do is once I know the address of where your complex, community, what have you, is located, I go in and I see what is around there, because the styles that are being sold in Houston could be totally different than what is being sold in Florida, Arizona, all these different places, right?
Right.
So I want to know what is actively selling in your area. So once I get the address, I kind of look at communities nearby, or if you happen to know, hey, there's XYZ down the street, then I just say, hey, give me that information. I go look at those so I know what your comps are, because I need to know, hey, where are you planning on having this building? Like, are you a C wanting to go to a B? Are you a B wanting to go an A? What have you? Sure. So I know like what level of design you need to meet, what your numbers are saying.
Sure. Sure.
Once I have that, then usually I try to get a survey, because that way I can actually see from an aerial view, where your buildings are, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes there's ways around it. Obviously, have it. That's even better. So I ask for that. And then really from there, I ask for photos and videos. So I want to know, what are some of the things that you see as a problem area currently? Like, this area is okay, but oh my gosh, we got this eyesore over here. Or maybe it's a view of what that has. Like, I don't want them seeing this over here. So things that kind of stand out to you, that I want in a video. And then I also ask for still shots so that I can really paint the picture so I know what is where. Sure. Because when I do the design, I do it from an aerial standpoint, so I draw out where the buildings are. And then especially if there's common areas, I'm putting benches, I'm putting landscaping, whatever the case may be. So you can see where I'm placing it. And then I take the elevation photos that you send me, and I usually do an overlay on top of your existing photo so that you can really see what I'm trying to do. And I've got examples of that where you can kind of see my overlay and then what was created. So you can see what I'm talking about. And then as I see that, if there's a certain design that I'm thinking about, I may ask for certain dimensions. So I know, okay, how wide is this wall? That way I know, if there's something I can do with it, whatnot. And a lot of it is conversation. It's understanding, how far do you want to go with this design? Are you wanting minimal? Are you wanting a full-on change? What condition are your railings in? That kind of stuff. And between the conversation, the pictures and videos, I can do the work for you. And then I stay with the person throughout the project, because as you know, anytime you renovate, there's always surprises that pop up.
Of course.
Yeah. And sometimes that'll change the design because it's just an unexpected thing. And that way, when it happens, I can be like, okay, let's do this. You modify and you go. But that's why once we sign, I am there all the way through. And, some of these projects can take a year, depending on how big they are. Sure. I'm still with them throughout the whole process, because even later, those things can change.
Okay, great. So I appreciate the summary. And so I'm going to touch on a couple things. So what you described earlier, so you like to operate off of a site plan first, right? Now, so you're providing an aerial view, which you really, sounds like you're using a survey to help provide a sketch of the concept, more of like a site plan.
Yeah, that way I know, like if it's a multiple building situation,
right?
I know the relation between the buildings and I know your distance. So that way I know what's possible to actually put in like a courtyard or what have you.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense, right? So that would be great when you're looking to design some common area and create some functional space within that common area. I know that's a really big thing now, especially inside our apartment communities, and trying to make that community a lot more appealing to a resident base, right? So I think that's really cool. So let's shift over.
Competing with.
I'm sorry, and who you're competing with. Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah, for the new.
Okay, now let's shift over to the elevations, right? Front, side, the elevations, and then we'll also talk a little bit about the floor plan, the interior. So one of the things that I've learned, and I like working with, whether it be an architect, draftsperson, I think it's kind of situational, but using software, I know now they have these scanners out, right? These survey scanners where you can go into a room, right? You scan a room, take a 3-dimensional image of the room. It's really cool. And then you just automatically upload that to CAD. And I go, man, this is incredible. And so you're not having to reduplicate work, right? Like you don't have to go out and draw the floor plan, then go back and then draw it on CAD or use Revit for that matter. Yeah. But you can use the scanners, go through, scan a room like a kitchen, for example, or all of the rooms right in the building, and then that will automatically get uploaded right into CAD. So how do you, what could you share right with our audience, and how do you approach these projects to create efficiency? And then also what software do you use? Because being able to present that remotely, right, in a 3-dimensional light with colors, it makes a really big difference. Yeah. Especially when you're trying to communicate a concept. Yeah. Right. To an end user like me, for example. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And again, obviously it depends on the project, right? What all you're changing kind of thing. Right. What I typically do now, I'll separate exterior and interior for elevations. So on the exterior, I actually use Photoshop. I like Photoshop because it's still the building itself. It's not a drawing. It's your actual building. And then I put the new finishes, the new what have yous on that photo. And if there's particular things like a certain type of railing, a certain type of, I don't know, a particular design style, what have you, I also include additional images because sometimes it just helps visually for you to see that particular product installed somewhere else. Sure. So it's like, along with the elevation that I'm providing you, again, the kind of Photoshopped elevation, I also do little side bubbles that say, here's what this is, just so that you can start understanding real things. And those all put together, my clients are usually like, oh, okay. Like they get it at that point. For the interior, I don't do photos. Those you do draw out. A lot of times with the interiors, at least with apartments, you're not getting into homeowner overcomplicated things. So with that, you do have the floor plans. I can still do a 3D drawing. I honestly haven't done it a lot for the apartments because it just hasn't been needed.
Yeah. I don't see you needing that. Yeah, makes sense.
I'm working on C to B type things, and they're like, that we don't need that. Yeah. So for that, a lot of times it's your finishes, your fixtures, that kind of stuff. But I will do, obviously, like I'm working on one now that it was gutted. Like, I mean, when it was purchased, it was just nothing but columns. And so I had to start from scratch. So with that one, I'm doing full floor plans. Again, not the construction documents, but I had to do full floor plans so that my client knew, can I fit 8 units in here? Can I only do 6? What do these look like? So with that, I do start with the full floor plan, drawing that out. And even with that, the only elevations I do are for the kitchen, so they know what kind of cabinets they're going to do. But otherwise, again, it's like they don't want me to spend the time doing elevations that they're like, whatever, it's a bathroom. I need a vanity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, especially if nothing's going to be changed on the exterior, right? On that side of the building or with that elevation, if you will. So I completely get that.
Yeah. So and that's why when it comes to multifamily, it's like every project is so different. There's not really a cookie cutter to it. Mm-hmm. And so because I get asked pricing, of course, a lot. And it is, I mean, I have an idea of pricing, but I always have to look at it first because I need to know, are there common areas? How many common areas? You know, how many different facades are there? You know, are we doing the interiors? Is there an office that we're doing? You know, so there's just a lot of different things to look at. And like, I always do project pricing. I don't do hourly. I think it's insane. But I'll do project pricing. And I also work with investors because, again, there's all different kinds of scenarios. So it may be you have the funds in the beginning to say, I'm hiring this person here's a design fee. There you go. Other people might be, I know I need to do something, but they don't have a lot of funds in the beginning. So I work with people. I'm like, okay, if you can't, you know, if this doesn't work for you, then let's talk. Like, how can we make this work? Right. Just like you would when you're buying a property, right? It's like you have to have different exit strategies. Kind of the same thing with design. It's like, I understand. So it could be X amount is paid in the beginning, and then we work something else out. Obviously, if it was, you know, $2,000, that price would change if we're doing different things. But you need to have a win-win situation because I want you to have a great NOI. I want you to have, you know, more apartment complexes, happy tenants, because that's what you want. You want people to be like, oh my God, I want to rent your place, not the one down the street. Right. So that's my goal for what I do. But like I said, it doesn't mean that it's just a straightforward, this is the price, write me a check. You know what I mean? I think there's different ways to do it.
Okay. And so in hearing you kind of talk through this, it sounds like what you're really doing is you're putting together conceptual they're really conceptual drawings, right? For these properties. Mm-hmm. And if your client feels that drawing is a good fit for the property based on what the plan is, then at that point, maybe that will go to an architect, and then the architect will take that, right? Convert that into a buildable drawing with construction documents, and then now you have a set. That's if you're going ground up or if it's a major renovation. But right. The drawings I completely understand, and I think it's a great idea because many times, especially depending on the city, if it's a renovation or a large renovation, you don't need to go and pull permits from the city, right? So right. There's no sense going to construction documents, especially if you've been doing this for a while and you have a really good team in place. As long as you have the conceptual idea with measurements, you're good to go. So I like that. And
I work hand in hand with the contractors. So no matter, again, what city, what state, I always tell them, I'm like, hey, the contractor and I should be on a first name basis texting. Sure. Because things pop up in the field, you know, and obviously it depends on the relationship between the investor and the contractor and all that kind of stuff. Some I go straight through the investor. Others are like, hey, would you work with my contractor? So obviously, you know, I do whatever my client wants, but a lot of times with a contractor, because it happens. And then that's when sometimes we get on like a video call. Thank God for video calls.
In many cases, right, you bring up actually a really good point early, and I'm just trying to think through this on how to phrase this question in a way that will engage our audience, so that when people look at this stuff or when they think through the conversation, that the way that we're communicating the information, they can actually apply it to their projects, right? They're thinking, okay, well, this makes sense. I can actually, now I know how to use this to approach my own project. Yeah. So let me ask you some questions, okay? So let's use the example that you talked about earlier, right? So you have a design concept. I buy an apartment building.
So my dog's trying to eat a fly. I'm sorry.
No problem. So I say I purchase an apartment building. I reach out to you and I say, hey, Tina, I have this apartment building. Say we'll use a 50-unit apartment building. I come to you and I say, I want to, I want to reposition this thing, and I want to start with the design, right? We may want to add some more functional space to the area, right? A park, and just make it a little bit more inviting with a little barbecue area or what have you, right? So I'm speaking out some of the ideas that I have. And the reason why I want to do this, Tina, is because when we were comping out these properties, right? Fortunately, I have the comps and I'm showing you, here's some competing properties that I have in mind and some things that they've done that I think are really attractive. And if we can come up with something comparable, right, with maybe some different design themes, then I believe that we'll be a very competitive property and we'll be able to differentiate ourselves and charge or hit our rent targets, right? So I bring that information to you and I say, okay, here are the competing properties. Here's the idea. So in other words, I'm saying, look, here's the concept that I have, but I'm hiring you to inject your ideas in, and I can give you some feedback to make sure we're going down the right path. And that's how I like to work. And so now that you have that, where would you go from there, right? What would be some of the questions you would ask? What would be your process for that, right? And so using me as an example, what would be some things that you would ask and to kind of move that concept forward to start bringing it to life?
One of the questions I would ask is, well, and obviously along with that, I would have the information of the property that you have, right? So I would have some pictures and stuff. So I have comparisons from the beginning. So I know kind of where you're at to where you want to go.
Yep.
Some of the questions would be like, what's the condition? Not what I'm seeing on the picture, but what is the condition of the place? Meaning, how much stuff do you have to do outside of the pretty side? Like, do you have to replace a bunch of rotten wood? Are the doors trash? Whatever the case may be. So I kind of have an idea of, you want to get there, but you've got this much that has to go to the actual structure. So I might be left with this much for design versus the other. So I just want to know the full picture. So
when you say you're left with this much for design, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Can you elaborate?
Yeah. So it can look like, you might have a healthy budget to renovate in your mind, right? So your numbers, you're like, I got a good budget here. So if I hear that, I'm like, awesome, there's so much stuff that we can do. But I may not realize that in your healthy budget, part of that budget may be, but part of my budget is to these other things, not necessarily the design, if that makes sense. So it could be stuff that I don't know about.
Oh, okay, so, and that makes sense. But if say it's a 50-unit apartment building, right, and we're looking to make an investment of $500,000 to $1 million in that building or in the apartments, right, in that complex, typically the design or the architectural budget is fairly small relative to that.
Oh, yeah.
Massive investment.
I think part of it is, it depends if someone's been doing it for a while or not. So I think that was more for people that haven't done it a lot, is so that they understand it's like when they're doing else that doesn't necessarily apply to me. So when just so that people know that when they're talking to the designer, it is, when I say the pretty side, it is also the functional side, so the functional and pretty side, but not necessarily the side that is still going to cost you money, like to get it structurally sound. I would say most people know not to include that into the pretty design functional side. Some of the new people may not. They might lump it together because for whatever reason, I think the line between with what I do and other things sometimes gets blurred in different ways.
Can you give me an example of that? Yeah.
Yeah. So some people think the extreme of the other side. So they think the pretty side, right? Which doesn't include functionality. What we do is functional, then pretty. Okay. So you got that extreme where it's like they think we're here, but we're here. Then you kind of have the other side, which is They lump us into a little bit more construction, but construction that doesn't necessarily apply to what we're doing numbers wise.
Let me ask you this, okay? Because you're talking about the mechanical components of construction.
Yeah, which is separate.
Yeah, mechanical, plumbing, electric, right? Those are specialty trades, right? Usually they're hired in to come up with their own plans relative to
Our design.
Yeah, relative to what you put together, right? Okay, but so here's the question though. So with that being said, you talk about pretty and functional. So are you combining the two with design and functionality, or you just focus on functional space? Because I would think it would go together.
And design. Yeah. Functional and design. Yeah. But what's weird is I've actually had people approach me late to where it was literally just the pretty side. And when I looked at the space, I'm like, I wish you would have called me sooner, because there's certain things that were done from a functionality standpoint that could have been done so much better. Not that it would have cost any more. It would have just been done in a better way from a functionality standpoint. But they didn't think about it because they're like, oh, it's simple. I'll just do this. And then I'll hire you to pick the paint colors. And I'm like, that's great. But, if you fully utilize someone who does design, that's what you want. You want a very functional space, especially these apartments. They're not usually huge. So the more functionality you can put in a small space, the better it's going to be for the end user. And even some of the things to me that I think make that little bit of difference between your complex, let's say, and somebody else's can come down to those little things. So in general, a lot of people know what's kind of selling as far as colors go, but you got to think these tenants, that's their home, right? Just like your home. And so little things that can get skipped on, that's like, oh, whatever, I'm getting towards the end of my budget, I'm just throwing this in there, right?
So can I ask you a question, Tina? Can I ask you a question? So let's talk a little bit about what you see that's trending right now in the Houston markets for exterior design and interior design, right? So what do you see trending right now for exterior design? What's trending?
It's still modern.
For apartment buildings, that is, right? For apartment buildings.
Yeah, it's modern. Clean lines. I think clean in general. I'm trying to think the last couple that I did. It's funny because I know there's a lot of white, black, and cedar, and we're still doing it. I'm kind of ready to get past it, but you'll still see quite a bit of it. I think really honestly, clean and modern is a lot of what you see. And I don't mean modern meaning like contemporary cold, just clean lines. What about the color? What are the typical color schemes that you see for the exterior? What's trending honestly, right now in terms of color scheme? For the exterior, it's kind of all over. You'll see, it depends on the complex too. If you have bigger complexes, you'll see the combination where they're trying to break it up. So you'll see a lot of neutrals still, but you're combining the grays and the tans. We're not doing an either or so much. I think adding colors like that is, I see that a decent amount. Some I'd say at least B or above complexes, you're adding some wood in there, some like cedar or something that looks like wood to add warmth into a space. Because in general, we're moving away from the cooler colors and we're going back to a little bit of warmth. So even when you see gray, which, dear God, I know everyone knows the color agreeable gray. Mm-hmm. It's like everywhere. But it's because we're moving away from those cool toned grays and we're moving into grayish, the warmer grays, even tans, but not your yellow tans. That's kind of where you're seeing a lot of the colors. You're still seeing a lot of light colors because, again, you have small spaces, so you want them to feel nice and bright. So you're still seeing lighter colors, not so much with the gray wood floors If you're doing the wood floors, it is more of a brown wood, not your yellow or red undertone, just kind of a brown. I'd say mid-tone type woods. Again, for the exterior, it's still I'd say a little all over the map on that one.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of neutrals though. And then you're still going to see your pops of black. So they throw that in. But in Houston, you don't see a lot of crazy colors. We're just not that city. I think you go down to Miami or someplace, then you're going to start seeing more of it. But here,
sure,
and they're nice neutrals, though. I'm not saying a snooze fest. They're nice neutrals. So you'll see darker, lighter, that kind of thing.
That's funny. Well, I really appreciate you. We're approaching the end of our show right now. So I want to thank you for being on. You've been a great guest. What are some last words that you can share with our audience about just things to consider, right? Things to consider, if when you look back on all the clients that you've had or the folks that you've worked with, what are one or two things you can share that would improve the outcome of their project? So if you said, hey, these are all the headaches that I've seen from people not doing this, here's what to not do. And what would that be?
I would say in general, don't think you can do everything yourself, because number one, no one's an expert in everything. Number two, you're going to burn out if you do.
Yeah.
Plan. That is the best thing anyone can do. Plan from the beginning, because if you do that in the beginning, the rest of your project is going to go so much smoother. You're going to think of things and not have the, oh my God, I forgot moments. And every time you have an, oh my God moment, your price just went up, right? So planning ahead. And the other thing is, remember that details do matter. This is where someone lives. And so, yes, you are the investor. Yes, you are about NOI and your numbers and everything. But obviously, if people are going to rent your place, that's what's going to help your NOI, right? It's because people want to live in your building, not the one down the street.
Sure.
And with that, some of those little details that you might be like, those do make a difference. And that's at any price point. I mean, obviously, the higher up you go, the more that matters. But in general, it does. And a quick example, one of the buildings that I worked on, we did a pretty major transformation on it. And it was only 31 units. It was 2 buildings like this. And you got a corridor in between. It had 0 amenities. We added amenities galore in such a small space, changed the whole look of it. And the type of tenants there completely changed. Management also changed. But you didn't have, there was some gunshots at one point, but you didn't have that type of, but it just, the client base changed. The people that lived there started really appreciating their space.
Sure.
So whereas before it's like, whatever, they leave stuff around, because I've been there since then. And they've even started, like, all the planter boxes that I created. It's like they're taking ownership of them. Like there's some great plants there. Right. And there was a couple that got married under the pergola that we did, which I was so excited about. If it wouldn't have been weird, I would have knocked on the door and be like, can I have some photos? But I'm not that weird. So, but
hey, it must have been a really nice pergola.
Yeah. And for me, it was like, they're probably like, oh my gosh, this is so nice. And they took advantage of it. Like, that's what you want. You want people to be like, I live here. And every time they renovate a unit, it gets rented. And in the area, they call it the mansion, because it changed so much for that area, and it's a place people want to live. So it made a ginormous change.
Awesome. Well, hey, I want to thank you for being on. You've been a great guest. I want to wish you continued success. What is one question that you have for me, Tina, that you think might add some value to our audience?
So from a designer standpoint, I guess sometimes I don't know from the investor side what maybe your expectations are, what your thoughts are of a designer, and I guess what some of your hesitations might be.
Okay, so I let me just make sure I'm understanding the question. Are you asking me, like, when I'm working with someone, how I like to collaborate with them on a project?
Well, because you've worked with designers.
Right.
Some people have not.
Okay.
They've been hesitant to do that. And so I'm curious what that hesitancy is.
Okay. I can't maybe really speak to others, so I'll speak in terms of my own experiences, right? I think from my standpoint, it's really just finding someone that I work well with and that is really competent at what they do, so that I'm not having to spend a lot of time doing what I'm hiring them for.
Right.
I think that would be the first thing, because the reason why I don't say price, because if you're reaching out to someone like a designer or an architect, right, you're reaching out to them because you need them to help complete a concept that you have in mind, right? You need that component to be able to complete a concept. And so there's a need there. And I think the big hesitation on my part has always been making sure that I'm hiring someone that I don't have to, that doesn't become a burden to the process, right? So you're hiring them, they say, yes, I can do this, that they actually can perform, they're really good at what they do, so that it frees my time up to go do other things and allow them to do their job, but make sure that there's a high level of collaboration along the way so that we don't lose momentum. I think that's a really big one for me. Just someone that's going to do what they say, that is really competent at what they do, and that's a really good communicator, and they adhere to timelines, right? Hey, John, I expect to have this done by this date, and it gets done by that date or sooner. Because if you're not worried about submitting a set of proposed plans to the city, right, for them to review and then provide back a bunch of corrections, make the corrections, then send back. If you don't have that step there, and then of course, then construction documents first, right, and then it should be a really, really simple process. And it should be really fast, actually. Yeah. And so that would be my reservation, if any. But those would be the expectations that I set when we're working with our design teams, right? Just so that we have a smoother process. And then being really clear about dates and timelines. Mm-hmm. And just making sure that the designer or the architect, that they're shouldering the responsibility of following up on those dates, right? And collaborating around what the finished work is, right? If we said, hey, we're going to get this done by this date, and these are all the dates that we're going to meet, and these are all our milestones along the way, usually those projects end up with really good outcomes.
Yeah. Okay.
So hopefully that helps. So, hey, Tina, I want to thank you for being on the call. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed having you on. Thanks so much for your insights. And how do people find you out there? What's the best way for people to find you?
They can go straight to the website because my email's on there and everything. I kept everything very simple. So awesome. TinaThomasDesign.com. And my email's not much different. So I try to make life easy.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Because I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, all that kind of stuff. So obviously they can always reach out to me via those platforms as well. But if they go to my website, they can at least get my phone number and my email address. I answer to both. But that's kind of like the easiest way to find me. Just TinaThomasDesign.com.
Awesome. Well, hey, Tina, thank you so much for being on. I want to wish you continued success and the best of luck in your endeavors. And I'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you. Clarity of purpose creates our greatest competitive advantage. When we transform apartment buildings to thriving communities, we improve how people live and create assets with high profit margins. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this up with a friend. I'm John Brackett, bringing you things you can implement right away.